Hi, I'm Taylor Schroll of Forte Catholic, and that is
Kaitlyn Facista.
from Tea with Tolkien. We are here for our three-part series called The Road to Rings of Power. So Kaitlyn, being named, Tea with Tolkien, quite obviously knows a lot about Tolkien. I have not interacted with anything Tolkien in over a decade, but with the Rings of Power, other than your podcast, actually, I've actually listened to every episode of the Tea with Tolkien podcast. But I haven't watched anything in a while. And with Rings of Power coming out, Amazon Prime's new big, tentpole TV show, I was like, okay, let's jump back in. So I'm going through as the idiot that knows nothing and rewatching the movies. And then after every movie, I'm going to meet back up with Kaitlyn, and she's going to teach me all the things that I need to know. So first of all, thanks for deciding to do this with me and teach me a little bit something about Tolkien.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
I am too. So the first thing that I my first question after watching The Fellowship of the Ring was, do you, as a huge Tolkien fan, do you like the movies? I know everybody hates the Hobbit movies, but the Lord of the Rings movies.
We're not talking about the Hobbit.
Do you like them?
Yeah, I like them. I really enjoy them as films. As adaptations, I would say they're like 85% faithful, which for an adaptation is huge.
Yeah.
I know Peter Jackson made a lot of changes, but I think the changes he made make sense in most cases. And he captured the tone of Tolkien really well. And overall did an incredible job, I think.
Good. That's glad to hear. I mean, I enjoy them, but it's one of those things that I know, like, oh, everybody's like, oh, the books are always better than movies or whatever. And it's like, there's other series where I've read the books and I was like, okay, like kind of what you're saying, like it was mostly fine, or other times where I was like, this was terrible, So right. I wanted to see where a real Tolkienite, what's the correct term? Tolkienite? Tolkiener? Tolkien?
I have no idea. Tolkienian?
A midnight Tolker? I don't know. Right. But one thing, my one complaint, it's very good. It's crazy how these movies are like old now, and they still look really good. I just watched it in 4K on my big old TV. It's incredible. But I think my one complaint is, the Frodo actor, I don't like him. I don't think he's did a very good job. Wood? I thought he was just kind of legitimately along for the ride throughout the entire movie.
I guess, the hobbits are supposed to be like really, really fat too. They're all pretty thin compared to, I guess, how a hobbit would be.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think he does a good job. I feel like he has kind of because there's almost like a class system in the Shire where Sam is more of a servant and Frodo is more of like his boss. And I feel like he does that very well, while not coming off as a jerk. Like they have a very loving friendship, but there's still like, they each know their place. And I don't know, I feel like he does that pretty well. But at some points he does come off as kind of whiny, but I guess you probably would too if you were carrying the ring.
Yeah, maybe. I think I'd probably just be fully bad and fully angry. I think was the thing that I came away with. More
you
like
full Boromir.
Exactly. I totally forgot that happened. A lot of that happened. It's so interesting. All the things that I forgot happened or like mixed up in my head or whatever. So it's actually really cool going through this. But one of the things when we first started talking about doing this together, you were telling me about the ages, right? So I know you told me that like the Lord of the Rings happens in the third age, but this Rings of Power is the second age. So explain that a little bit to me.
Okay, so there are three main ages in the history of Arda, which Arda is the entire world and Middle Earth is just a part of it. So the first age is before the first age, you have different spans of time where the world is created, and then there's different things happening. You have before the sun and the moon, you have the world being lit by two lamps, and then after the lamps is the trees. So you have the years of the lamps, the years of the trees, and then after that, you have the first age, which is where a lot of the great battles happen. And then the second age is when I don't want to like spoil it too much of it, but the second age is after there's a really big battle at the end of the first age. after that is the Second Age, which is like about 3,000 years long. And it ends with another really big battle. And then the Third Age, you have the Lord of the Rings storyline happening towards the end of it. And as the ring is destroyed at the end of the Lord of the Rings, the world enters into the Fourth Age. But Tolkien didn't really write too much about the Fourth Age.
I gotcha. So the Lord of the Rings was like the big kind of the culmination of the story. Yeah. With obviously things are going to go on, but we don't know what's going on. Okay.
Yeah.
What's interesting after I watched the first movie after we had discussed first doing this, and you were like, "Oh, it's Second Age," but then I was fascinated. I just completely forgot from watching this so long ago. And I think having more understanding after listening to you talk about it, it's the movie starts in the Second Age, like the Fellowship of the Ring, like the first 5 to 8 minutes or whatever before the title scene seems to be very much connected. It looks like to me to the Rings of Power show.
Yeah. So that battle that you see in the very beginning when you have Galadriel doing the voiceover and she's basically setting the stage is going to happen. If they don't put it in the Rings of Power, I don't know how the show will really make sense.
Right.
I imagine basically that's what season 5 will be, where eventually you see Sauron defeated, and then the Second Age ends. So basically that's like a 5-minute version of what we will see in the show. We'll obviously see it in more depth and probably from a different perspective, but we'll definitely see that battle happening.
So you said season 5. Have they said that it's going to be 5 seasons? Like you think it's going to be the end of the show?
They've said there's going to be 50 hours. So 5 seasons, 50 hours, 10 hours each.
So much.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
And the showrunners have said they have the whole thing plotted out and that they have like the final shot of the series like in their heads already. So it's all going to be very carefully plotted out, I guess.
That's good. And then like, did Tolkien for the show for Rings of Power? Did Tolkien write stuff for this Second Age, or is it like they're fleshing out some little things that he wrote about?
He did write a lot that you can find in the Silmarillion. It's towards the end of the book. It's called Akalabaith, and that is the downfall of Numenor. But the writers don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. So what they're using is all of the small references that are throughout the Lord of the Rings. And then they also have the appendices, which has it's like a bullet point history of the Second Age and all of the years. And so they've described it as like they have like Tolkien left stars and they're making constellations from it. So they're kind of like
cool.
Have a sketch. But at the same time, I have a theory that they maybe have more material than they're letting on. I've heard some people say that if they don't have the rights to something, they just have to ask the Tolkien estate on a case-by-case basis. So there might be more Silmarillion in the show than we think, but I'm not sure. But yeah, Tolkien did write. He wrote not a lot, but there's definitely stuff there.
I got you. So it's not like they're completely making it up. There's some kind of skeleton or like the stars constellation thing that it's kind of guiding them. It's almost,
I would say, it's very similar to fan fiction, which is like, I don't say that in a derogatory sense. Like fan fiction can be good because it's a made up story set within a canonical story, which to me is the definition of fan fiction. But the difference is that it's licensed and they're, very expensive. So it's kind of just like they allowed these people to write a story and share it.
Yeah. Good. So in that intro scene to the Fellowship of the Ring, it's talking about the Second Age and the creation of the rings. So I think one of my, I have many questions about the One Ring, but like the creation of the rings, it said that they were given to humans, to elves, to dwarves. So I have many questions, but I think the first one is like, do the rings themselves, do all of the rings have powers? Like, do they grant the wearer abilities?
Yeah, they all have different powers. They're called rings of power. So they have different kind of magical powers that are basically reflective of the person who's wearing it, and it kind of enhances whatever their natural abilities would be.
That's really interesting because I was like, one of my next questions was how the one ring works, because I was like, in the intro it seemed to make Sauron really powerful and good in battle, and then it, what's his name, Frodo puts it on, it just makes him invisible, and I'm like, wait a second, like, why didn't it make him strong and powerful?
Right. Well, it really does. The One Ring, especially, it really behave. It's like it's not just an item. It like has a will of its own, and the way that it affects the wearer, especially, you can see it with Frodo and you can see it with Gollum. The circumstance in which the person obtained the ring really affects how the ring like affects them. So when Smeagol, who becomes Gollum, finds the ring, he immediately kills his cousin to take it. And so the ring has a much quicker effect on him than Frodo, who takes the ring at first just to keep it safe, but then he is like fully willing to destroy it. So it has a much slower effect on him.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. There's just so many questions that I had, and I was like, I just need somebody who knows these answers
I'll try
to talk to. So I guess one of the things was I didn't realize until this watch that, like, I always thought that, like, the One Ring was neutral and could be used for either good or bad. Like, if a good person got it, they could do good with it or whatever. But in this watch, it kind of seems like it's just like actually 100% bad. Because I remembered the whole, like, oh, we have to destroy it, right? I knew that, but it's like, in case the bad guy gets it, it's too powerful if he gets it. But it seems like it's just evil outright. What do you think?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a part in the movie and in the books where Elrond is like, this thing is altogether evil. Like, it cannot be used by anyone else. And that's kind of a debate that Boromir brings up. He's like, well, why can't we use it? But I think the reality is that Sauron poured so much of himself into the ring that it almost is like we were talking about this before we started recording, but it's like a Horcrux from Harry Potter, where he poured his soul into this magical ring. And so the ring is almost, I wouldn't say the ring doesn't equal Sauron, but the ring is a part of Sauron. And that's why it's so evil. And it can't be manipulated by anyone unless they had like absolutely incredible strength of will. But any mortal person just like wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, and like that, so like one of the big things that like I knew, like, a theme throughout was like, oh, all these other people, like, only Frodo can have the ring. Like, we see Boromir gonna go crazy wanting the ring momentarily. We see Aragorn with his big decision moment later on of like closing Frodo's hand when he could have taken it, like, but I think the one that really set with me the most was Gandalf refusing it, right? And like, because he says something to the effect of like, if evil got a hold of me, like, I'm too powerful, it would like destroy the world. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like, one, just the, like, obviously there's, faith components here of like resisting temptation and those sorts of things. So like, knowing that the ring was evil kind of changed how I was thinking about it. Like, because, going from the, oh, it could be used for good. I guess I'm more like Boromir, which I guess is kind of sad than I thought. But like, him refusing that power because it's like, oh, he just got tossed, he's about to get tossed around by Saruman. Yeah, I get confused with Sauron and
Gandalf.
Saruman. Yeah. So he's about to get tossed around. It's like, oh, it can make him more powerful, but I guess he knows it would corrupt him, which is, it's like, knowing himself is a really cool moment.
Well, so something interesting that I don't think the movie really lets on is that Gandalf and Sauron are the same type of creature. They're both these angelic creatures called the Maiar. And so Gandalf isn't just like an old man who learned wizardry and became a wizard. Like, he's literally like an angelic being. And so if he were to take the ring and fall under Sauron's command, it would be like Sauron suddenly has this ultimately powerful tool to use, kind of like. And so Gandalf was sent to Middle-earth in order to help in the cause against Sauron. So that would have been the absolute worst thing for Gandalf to choose.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had was like, what's the deal with the wizards? Like, what? Yeah. Like, what are they?
Yeah.
Where did they come from? Because, like, especially like knowing that Tolkien was a person of faith and that he poured that into these books. I kept trying to find some kind of comp, and I know enough about like working with like Tolkien and Lewis stuff and talking to you. It's like, oh, Lewis was a little bit more like a 1-to-1 comparison, but Tolkien's not a 1-to-1. But I couldn't even find a thing to compare it to. Like, what are the wizards?
Yeah. So the wizards are called the Istari, and there's 5 of them that we know of, and they all came to Middle Earth around the beginning of the Third Age. So you have Gandalf and you have Sauron, and then you also have Radagast, who we saw in the Hobbit movies. And then there are 2 other wizards called the Blue Wizards that Tolkien didn't really write much about at all, and so they're very mysterious. So going back to the show, I think that we might see a blue wizard in the show, just because Tolkien left that so open. And we know that Gandalf wasn't a part of the Second Age. He was over in Valinor, which is like, that's a whole nother thing to talk about. That's like the Blessed Realm, the Undying Lands. And that's where Gandalf is from, because he's one of the Maiar. I guess he's not from there. They're all from outside of the earth. But when he came to the earth, that's where he was. I don't know. The wizards are very mysterious, but they're not men, and they're not like another race of people. They are like angelic beings.
Yeah, I think that's what I was picking up too, because like I was more in, like growing up, I was more into Harry Potter. So like when I heard wizards, I thought a human that just have extra abilities, right? And then I was like watching this, and I was like, when he like I guess I forgot from watching it before, like how much he shows his power, like to the hobbits, to the other people. Like I remember like the "you shall not pass" moment, but I forgot all the other moments where he's incredibly powerful. It's like it very much like showing that like otherworldly power. Like, I'm not one of you, like,
and when you see him fighting the Balrog, which is the fiery creature that he says, you shall not pass. The Balrogs are also Maiar, which are the same angelic beings as Gandalf. And so you can see what happens to that kind of a spirit when they do choose something so evil. So you can see like how powerful he is. Like even Gandalf himself is extremely drained, and ultimately he kind of dies fighting one of them. So like they don't mess around.
Yeah. I didn't realize. Yeah, that one of the. I didn't realize that the Balrog was like of the same species or whatever as Gandalf. So he wasn't always like fiery. Like he looked more like Gandalf than a scary fire monster at some point.
They don't have. So they don't really have forms of their own because they're like spirits. So in the beginning, they chose forms for themselves, but especially like with Sauron, as his power spreads out of him through his evil creations, and through the way that he influences the world, and the more he ties himself to the world, the less he's able to change that form. So you could say with a Balrog, they could have been more fair to begin with, but at this point they're like stuck in this form because they've let their power go from them and bound themselves to the earth. It's kind of confusing.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, because it's like, think of like, biblically, like, the angel of light, Satan, like he gets cast down and he goes from being this angel of light to not, and we think more like fire demon thing, which is very much connected to Balrog. So it connects for me. I'm tracking what you're saying there.
Yeah, there's a book that came out recently called The Nature of Middle Earth, and it's extremely dense, and there's a lot of stuff about that in the book, but it's not the kind of book that you would just sit and read. It's more like a reference book.
I gotcha. So speaking of wizards, and maybe that's not the right transition, but I had a question about Galadriel, because I know that like not only is she in Rings of Power, she's like the main character, right?
It looks like it, yeah.
Okay. So I was confused about what she is. Like, I know that she's an elf, but she seems even different amongst the elves. And I think when the Fellowship is approaching her, they say something like she's like an elven witch or an elven, like, so is she like, where is she at with like the wizards and the elves? Like, what is Galadriel?
So Yeah, so the whole idea that Galadriel is a witch is just a rumor started by the men of Gondor who are like freaked out by her because they don't really like the elves very much. But so Galadriel is actually a really interesting character, especially in The Lord of the Rings, because she is one of the oldest elves like ever. She was born before the sun and moon. So if you watch the Rings of Power trailer or the teaser that came out, she says something like, there was a time when the world was so young, there hadn't even been a sunrise. And she was there for that. So she is
very dark.
Like, well, they had the trees. So before the sun and the moon, you had the trees. And before that, you had the lamps. So it wasn't dark, but it's different. Gotcha. But so she is like that old. She's older than the sun itself. And so she used to live over in this blessed realm. And then one of her family members, his name is Feanor, who made the Silmarils, which is what the Silmarillion book is all about. He basically led a chunk of his family over to Middle Earth. And so that's how she got over there. And by the time we get to the Lord of the Rings, she's, I believe, I wouldn't say 100%, but I believe she's the oldest elf, at least one of the oldest elves living in Middle Earth. And she's seen so much more than even Elrond has seen. And so she has so much wisdom, and her realm, Lothlorien, is like ultra protected from anything evil. So I think it just freaks the men out a little bit, and they don't know what to make of it. So they call her a witch.
So her powers are more like just very strong elven powers. Like she's like the visions and the being able to talk with, like telepathically talk and stuff. That's just like a quote unquote normal elven magic, just super strong because she's so old.
Yeah. And I would say, so she has like special gifts. Like she has the gift of farsight, which I think is mentioned in the movies. But then there's also the 3 elven rings that you get with the Rings of Power. There's 3 rings for the elven kings. And when Sauron was wielding the one ring, they realized that he had power over the rings, so they didn't use them. But once the ring was cut from his finger, they felt that it was safe to use these 3 rings. So Galadriel has one of the rings, and she is able to use that to, I think, enhance her own abilities, and it also protects her realm. So that's part of why Lothlorien is so safe.
Okay, yeah, when I saw that she had the ring, I was like, is that one of the rings? Because I was like, I was watching it and I was like, what are the Black Knight riders, the people that had the rings, the Nazgul. Yeah, so they were riding out earlier in the movie, like before we see Galadriel. And so I was like, one of my questions before was like, oh, did he just kind of like, did Sauron just like snap his fingers and all of a sudden they were turned into the Nazgul or whatever? So like, I didn't know if that all happened at once or, and then I was like, oh, I was doing math and I was like, I don't think that's all of them. And then later in the movie, I see she's wearing a ring. I was like, oh, is that one of like the other rings? So I was really confused about where all the rings were and what they were doing.
Yeah. So there's 9 rings for the mortal men, and all 9 of them are now the Nazgul. And then there were 7 rings for the dwarf lords, but I think only 3 of those were recovered in the end, and many of them either got burned up by dragons or just lost. So no one really knows too much about where the dwarf rings are. And then the 3 elven rings, they still have them. So Gandalf actually also has one of them.
Oh, no way. I didn't know that. Okay, so the elf rings we have, 4 of the dwarf ones are gone, and 3 of the dwarf ones we have.
Yeah, so 4 were destroyed by dragons, and then the last 3 were recovered by Sauron.
Oh, okay. So he has them back.
Yes, but I don't really know if much came of them afterwards, because I don't think it was something that he was going to use himself. It was more of like the 7 dwarf rings went to the dwarves, and Sauron wasn't really able to conquer their wills. So they basically just used the rings to acquire a lot of wealth and power. But then the wealth and power ended up corrupting them anyways. And then we lost 4 to the dragons, and then Sauron ended up getting 3 back.
That's funny. The dwarves were so stubborn that he couldn't control them, but it also led to their downfall anyway. That's hilarious.
Right. I know. It worked out. That's a lot of stuff with Sauron or the other bad guys in Middle Earth. It's like, if their plans don't go exactly how they wanted, but it still works out for them anyways because people in general are just so dumb.
It's very funny. One of the other things that I saw that, or I guess going back to that beginning, that opening scene that I forgot, and it's probably going to come up in the Rings of Power show, is I knew like the famous yell, like the Isildur, but I had no idea what it was. I had no idea who he was, what it was in reference to. But you mentioned that he's going to be in the new show, and I saw that like he had the ring. He's the one that cut off the ring off of Sauron, and he had it. And I just completely forgot. He was in Mount Doom, like about to throw it in. Like it would have all been over after the Second Age, but he doesn't do it. And also the elf guy was there too. And like
Elrond.
Yeah.
If I were Elrond, I would have just pushed him in. Like, just push. If he says no, just push him in.
I wondered why he let him go, and like because then we see however many hundreds of years later, like when in the current time of the Fellowship, that he's like, oh, I gotta go do this again. It's so much more complicated now. I was right there,
I know, like I think a lot of it is that the elves have a lot of respect for people's own choices and for their own fates, and so I can see how he would have chosen not to push him in. But in hindsight, it would have been a good idea.
Yeah. Two funny things, and then I have a couple other questions. But I did think it was funny, like just the other things I forgot about the movie. Like I just completely forgot Sean Bean was in it. I think because I didn't know who he was when I watched it years ago. Yeah. But now after watching Lord of Game of Thrones,
Things or
Game of Thrones, it was just so funny because I was like, I forgot that he was in both of these, and it's very funny because at the end of this movie and at the end of season 1, famously Game of Thrones, he dies. And I'm just like, they're so similar.
He's just good at dying on screen, I guess. It's like anytime he's gonna be in a show, you're like, okay, I can't get too attached to this guy.
Right. And then the other one that I thought was hilarious, going to another thing that I love, is Star Wars. Saruman's Gandalf's old friend who fights for the Dark Lord, just like Christopher Lee, the actor, did in Star Wars. So it's like he flips to the dark side after being friends with an old Jedi. Like I just thought it was so funny. But I do have a question about Saruman. I think I always got them confused, Saruman and Sauron.
Right.
What made Saruman go bad? Like what made him choose to go with Sauron?
This is such a good question.
Thank you.
Saruman was always like the leader, like the greatest of the wizards. He had a lot of pride, whereas Gandalf was a lot more humble and reluctant. Like Gandalf didn't even really want to go to Middle Earth in the first place because he was worried that he might be tempted, or like he kind of just knew himself. And so on the other hand, you have Saruman, who's like he's fallen into pride, and it seems like it was a very easy thing for him. So his job was to study all of the lore and all of the ways of Sauron so that they would be able to defeat him. But instead of wanting to defeat him, he kind of ended up envying him and studying him so much that he felt like he could replace him, or that he could do what he was doing, but maybe do it better. And I feel like he did have good intentions for a long time, but he was just like, he just had like a slow fall into studying and learning. And he gets to this point where he thinks he knows so much. And then he kind of separates his mind from Gandalf and goes off on this search. So he actually starts searching for the ring way before Gandalf does, I believe. And he starts hindering other people's searching of the ring because he wants to find it first because he thinks he can keep it. So he kind of just learned a little too much and also got a little too proud at the same time.
Yeah. So he wanted that power. He wanted to be the big bad guy, or the big power.
And you can see this really well with the way that, so Gandalf doesn't have a home of his own. He's just like a wandering stranger, and he's a friend to everyone. So, I mean, he's a friend to a lot of people. So he goes to different realms and they have a place for him to stay. But you see Saruman, he has his own entire area, his own tower, and his own realm that he is in charge of. And so you can see the difference between them pretty easily there.
Yeah. Okay, so to close up our time, like we could talk forever. I mean, there's a 3.5 hour movie and so much lore that I could learn. The good news is we're going to be coming back every Friday for the next two, going through the next two Lord of the Rings movies, leading up to the Friday that Rings of Power releases. So maybe two or three like favorite moments from Fellowship that we haven't talked about for you.
Ooh, two or three only. I love when they're in Lothlorien with Galadriel. I think that scene, I guess it's a series of scenes, that section of the movie is done so beautifully. And it really captures how heavenly it is. It's almost like a heaven on earth kind of situation because of the peace that Galadriel has brought with her from Valinor and the way that the ring is kind of protecting them. I also love the beginning because I feel like it's so well done, the way that it introduces you to Hobbiton and you feel like you immediately fall in love with it. And it's in falling in love with the Shire that you can understand exactly what Frodo is giving up. So you can see how hard it is for him as he goes on. I think Tolkien does a really good job of that, where you have to understand what you're about to lose in order to appreciate it. And I think the movies did a good job of doing that too.
Yeah. For me, one thing I think because I mean I haven't watched the next two movies yet. I mean in 10 years or whatever. So there was one piece that like I'm excited because I don't remember what's going to come. But when Gandalf says to Frodo, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, like in regards to Gollum. And I don't I remember Gollum as being bad and the My Precious stuff. I don't remember. I'm guessing that's going to come to fruition, right?
Yeah,
and I don't remember, so I'm like excited.
Oh my gosh.
I'm excited to see that, you know?
Yeah.
I've forgotten. And then the two things, or another one was getting to see like three of the like leaders in the Fellowship, like leaders of their people. So like Gimli, whenever they're in the whenever they're underground in the Dwarven kingdom.
Khazad-dûm.
Yeah. So whenever they're there, he goes immediately from mourning the loss. He realized that all his people and his cousin, I believe, they're all dead. And like all the orcs are coming, and he just turns around and says, "Let them come." And I'm just like, dude, like just so it was so cool to like watch him go from mourning to like, I'm gonna fight for my people, because he says that there's one dwarf in Moria that still draws breath, and he's like, essentially, like while he still lives, like his people still lives. And I just thought like the legacy of that was like, it hit me pretty well. I was like, what, you know, like the kind of legacy that we want to leave, the kind of legacy that that has been left to us. That was just a really cool moment for me.
If you loved that, like a major part of the Rings of Power is going to be in Khazad-dûm and Moria.
Oh,
like
cool.
We're going to get to see it at its height. Nice. And it's like the height of its power and glory. And so if you really loved that, like, I feel like you're going to absolutely love getting to see it before everyone dies.
Yay! not a bunch of skulls. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's bright and beautiful and it's living. And so that'll be really cool.
And then one of the other ones, like I've kind of mentioned it earlier, but like just from a pure, like it was cool to see moment, like Aragorn resisting the temptation of the ring, closing Frodo's hand, setting him off. And then like just visually him fighting off, like there's just dozens of orcs coming and he's just fighting them by himself. That was just a cool visual moment. But like the more impactful like moment for me was actually Boromir, because like when he realizes after he made the mistake, like he fell to the temptation and he got all angry and all stuff, and then he realizes it, he's immediately like sorry for it. It's like sorrowful for his mistake. And like his fight scene, like it wasn't as cool as Aragorn's, right? But like the fact that he kept fighting when he had all the arrows in his chest, and it's like he knew that his time was over, but he like I think the remorse for falling to temptation, and then but choosing to still protect those around him anyway, because he messed up with one hobbit, but his fighting saved the other two, right? So it was like even after he made that big mistake, that it was a big part of the Fellowship falling apart, right? But he was able to. It was for me. It was like that deathbed conversion, right? Of like, he got to be the greatest of men, you know, and like one of the last things he tells Aragorn is like, there's still good in men, even if you can't see it. And it's just like, we literally saw that with him. It's like, there was no good in him for a few moments, and then it was all good until the end. It was just this really cool, it hit me quite a bit because I was like, oh, I make mistakes, you know, and I want to be able to bounce back like that without arrows in my chest, you know?
I feel like Boromir is kind of like the everyman in that sense. Like, we all want to think, oh, we're like Aragorn. We would never succumb to the power of the ring or the temptation. But I really think that Boromir represents most people, or maybe all of us, because we all feel tempted by things at certain times, and everyone makes mistakes and sins, but you can see in his response and the way that he confesses to Aragorn, it's almost like a deathbed confession where he's like, I'm so sorry. This is what I did. Like, please, like, forgive me. You can tell how sorrowful he is, especially by the way that he fought so hard to protect the other hobbits. And it's really beautiful, especially when you consider how much experience Tolkien had with war and loss. And so, yeah, Boromir is one of those really great characters that he gets kind of a bad rap because, yeah, he kind of went a little nuts at the end, but I don't really know anyone who could say they wouldn't do that when tempted.
Yeah, it's like, I kind of hope I'm Boromir and not Gollum, because I think that's kind of what I thought, you know, so I know I'm not Aragorn. That's very clear to me.
Right.
So, yeah, and I think that's like, you know, talking about the little things I remember from years ago. All I remember is that Boromir got a bad rap, and I'm like, I loved it. I loved how it ended. You know, like he still choosing the good despite mistakes before. So, all right, I'm going to give you the final word. Anything we missed on Fellowship of the Ring?
Okay, so there's one major plot change that I feel like I can't not talk about. So the part where Frodo's been stabbed by the Morgul blade, and there's an elf coming up riding on their horse, and there's the light shines. And if you've only read the books and you're watching the movie for the first time, you're like, oh, I can't wait to see Glorfindel. He's gonna save Frodo just like in the books. And then the light fades and it's Arwen. And so like, I hadn't read the books before I saw the movies as a kid, but I cannot imagine being like an adult fan who's read the books and you're so excited to see your favorite elf, Glorfindel, and it's a different elf. The way that they do it, if you go back and watch it, you see like, because you can't tell who it is at first. All you know is it's an elf on a horse, and then the light slowly fades and you realize, wait a second, there's a huge change that just got made here. And that always makes me laugh, but it's probably one of the biggest changes in the Fellowship that I can think of.
It's kind of funny because like usually like with TV or like adaptations or whatever that have source material, they'll do like little fake outs like that and then pay them off later or whatever. But that was just like, it wasn't a fake out. It was legitimately just a change. Yeah.
Right. And I know they were doing it because you had to be introduced to Arwen because you had to know who she is for later. But like when you're watching it for the first time, you're like, oh, I can't wait to see this elf. And it's not him.
Oh, it was okay. I was fine seeing Arwen. She's nice to look at.
Yeah. Everyone likes she is. Everyone likes her. Everyone likes Liv Tyler.
Well, good. I'm glad we did it. We did it. We covered the first movie.
Yeah, I'm excited to do the next two.
Yeah, we'll be back next Friday for what is that? Two Towers is the second one? Okay, I did it. I didn't even watch it yet, and I knew something. Good job. So we'll be back for Two Towers. We'll dive into that movie and any connections to the Rings of Power show that is releasing next month. So make sure that you hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, wherever you are listening. Hit subscribe so that you don't miss it whenever we return. You can find me at fortecatholic.com for the weekly podcast for stuff like this on pop culture. You can find Kaitlyn, her podcast, Tea with Tolkien, teawithtolkien.com. Where else can they find you, Kaitlyn?
On Twitter, pretty much at Tea with Tolkien. That's mostly where I am.
Awesome. Well, Kaitlyn, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. We hope that you enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments what you think, anything that I missed, because obviously Kaitlyn didn't miss anything, or like your favorite moments.
You let me know if I got anything wrong. Yeah.
your favorite moments from this movie, the things you're looking forward to, the Rings of Power. We'd love to hear from you guys. So until next week, see ya.